I think there's a social norm in Japan where purity is very important as part of its myth and its success story. So I don't think it's ever going to change. So if you are Chinese or Korean and you are post colonial legacy and you happen to be on the property of Japan, no matter what you do, they will never see you as Japanese. In the same way, I've met people who are half Japanese ethnically and they're not seen as Japanese. So this idea of being Japanese, no matter your legal status or your, let's say, blood status and part, like let's say you're a quarter Japanese like my son or half Japanese like my husband, you are not seen as Japanese. Being Japanese supposedly means 100% by blood Japanese. Of course, with things like 23andMe, that's completely nonsense. And actually, most anthropologists and sociologists will say that there is no such thing as ethnic purity.
It's different in every country you're in. As you mentioned, the Koreans in Japan are thought of a certain way. In the United States, they're thought of another way. What is that like for you as a Korean American, as somebody who, depending on what country you're in, there's a different perception of you? And this can apply to so many other groups, obviously, but it changes. And you hear the story all the time of people who migrate to the United States from Africa and all of a sudden have to deal with an entirely different set of expectations and things that are put upon them based on where they're from. What is it like for you as you move from country to country and have to sort of navigate that?
I'm obsessed with the diaspora. I'm obsessed with the idea that people could be scattered around the world, and then exactly what you said, that each place will determine how they will see you. So you're this perpetual minority, and yet you could be a successful minority or a failed minority, or depending upon how other people interpret you. I want to understand what's it like to be at the center and say, I interpret my own story. Like, that's kind of a really difficult thing. And what I see students around the country when I go to colleges, I'm perpetually amazed at how people define themselves in relation to other, instead of saying, I define myself as I am. That takes an enormous amount of maturity to say, I am not just part of a group. And it's not just if you're Korean, it could be anything, as you say, because the geographies around the world are constantly shifting. Those lines keep being redrawn. And every time a country is partitioned, like let's say India and Pakistan, and people keep moving in boundaries, we're going to have new identities, and that identities are constantly changing.
And then you have people whose like in the United States, for instance, that has been so driven by sort of a white male patriarchy for so long, having to come to terms with a changing demographic in their own right. And then you have some people who really want to help that, right? And they do their best. And yet, even people who want to try to do right, it's clunky, it's heavy, it's ham-fisted sometimes in their attempts to sort of go, I welcome you, to this guy. And you see the good and the bad when you're in a country like America. How do you sort of navigate that? And when you see people who are legitimately trying, but it's so not natural yet to sort of kind of step out of that world that they know so well, that white sort of driven world where men still sort of make a lot of the decisions.
It's interesting that you say that, because if white people hadn't helped me in my life, I would be nowhere. In the same way, a lot of African Americans have helped me. A lot of Jewish Americans have helped me. And I'm always giving credit to those who did help me, because for me, and I think being in law school had really helped. If you look at criminal law, intention governs the crime. So if you intend good things, and that's the difference between manslaughter and murder, right? So you killed somebody by accident, or you killed somebody with intent and it was premeditated. The penalties are different. I think that intention should govern, and it must govern the effect. Now, that said, sometimes the effects aren't what you want. Like murder, death is bad. We don't want that. However, I've had many people say incredibly dopey things to me. However, I have also said really dopey things to people. So I think that being a person of color or a minority or a female in any way does not somehow absolve you from you making mistakes. And I think as I get older, I am incredibly much more tolerant of our fumbling. Because if we don't fumble, then I don't see how we can ever make progress at all. Because again, then we'll be just like wanting this kind of pure intention, this pure act. That doesn't exist. I've had a lot of Korean people be really shitty to me. And I'm thinking, they were a Korean female. Does that mean that they were supposedly, I don't know, perfect. That's absurd. I've had most Korean women be amazing to me, but I've had a couple who are like, whoa, I can't even. So there you go.